Right, discussion today starts on the Roman Empire, looking at life and career of Octavian Caesar, how he becomes Augustus. During the Empire period, Octavian Caesar, known as Augustus, idea of princeps, poets Virgil and Ovid, some literature of the time period. Then looks at the careers of some of the emperors here, particularly Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. As well, we have a serious civil war, a period called the Year of the Four Emperors in AD 69. Fills out with Vespasian, then his sons Titus, Flavius, and Domitian. Well, our thought or phrase for the day is a Latin phrase, vincit qui se vincit. Cannot conquer unless you first conquer yourself. Cannot conquer unless you first conquer yourself. An old Roman idea that is, let's conquer your own passions, your own fears, in order to be able to accomplish anything else. So the Romans were particularly in the military, were a very disciplined bunch. So they knew about conquest. Importance about discipline and order. Augustus had hoped to restore some sense of order and stability to Roman society. And he had, during his reign, later years of the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD, large group of people who were very accomplished, disciplined, and dedicated to achievement in their own various fields. Architecture, literature, art, and so forth. You see a picture of Augustus here on page 148, statue. Now, Octavian had tried to do when he came to power was framing his rule as the restoration of the Republic. The Romans saw themselves as a republic above all else. And Augustus is doing is saying he's simply reestablishing that order. But emphasis on order. But understand, any military general who seizes power, any politician who executes a coup of some type, they always try to do it in the framework of legitimacy. It's not just the idea that there's some thief who came to power by some covert machination or conspiracy or a overwhelming use of power. Well, it may have been all of those in reality, but so there's actually a reason why they're there, and there's some precedent for it. And this idea, try not to alarm too many people. Try not to threaten too many people. They don't have to. Is the idea, the restoration of the Republic. And the later emperors are going to call Rome a Republic for the next 5 centuries. They are clearly an empire, there clearly is one man in charge. They might always agree who that man in charge should be, but they agree there should be one man in charge. The emperor, the imperator. And in many cases, these emperors, including Augustus, demanded they be worshipped as gods. And clearly, Augustus Caesar did not believe he was actually a god. He knew he was mortal, but he wanted that level of reverence. Rome is a polytheistic society, so he expects that adding him to the pantheon of gods is not too much to ask. So any Roman subject, citizen entering a Roman public building, have this picture of Augustus, you are to kneel before it. It's going to get some problems as Rome extends its control into Judea and they have the rise of Christianity in the 1st century. We'll get to those later on. But of course, with Augustus, this idea of maintaining stability by having all power vested in one man, it may work for someone like Augustus, who was, compared to the standards of some other Roman emperors, emotionally stable. You have some of these guys coming in here who aren't exactly firing on all cylinders. Another time, another place, they'd be put in a padded cell somewhere.
Don't get tired of running off and set it on fire.
Yeah, exactly. True. Like I said, in the 18th, 19th centuries, when Western studies of classical cultures was being renewed and appreciated, new sources being uncovered, it was the British historian Lord Acton thinking of these Roman emperors when he coined the famous phrase, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." Total and complete power and total and complete corruption in ways you can't even possibly imagine. In ways that I'm going to have to be very delicate in how I describe it to you. But what Octavian had done was he created a new sense of stability in Rome. Rome was stable again. It's at peace again. The civil wars are over. So trade is continuing. Prosperity is coming back. And so the period under Augustus's rule was really was was generally a very positive period overall for the most average Romans. Now, what Octavian did after his defeat of Antony was he steadily assumed more and more offices of the Republic, having himself name such things as consul for life. He makes himself a tribune in 27 BC, which gives him the power to initiate legislation. The Senate, while still technically legally has to approve everything, the basically comes a little more than an advisory board. And so they can ask the emperor to do certain things, but they really would rather not. In many cases, if they approve legislation from the laws set out by the emperor, but usually it's a matter of an after-the-fact thing. And sometimes, after they've died, so okay, we approve everything he did. But essentially, even though Augustus is calling himself the restorer of the Republic, the fact is he simply cemented the existing status quo that existed in the late Republic, the late 1st century BC, which is you have this ruling class of aristocrats, the upper classes, particularly those of the senatorial classes, basically solidifying their control of Rome. But with one of those rank, the imperator, the emperor, ruling them all. His rules unquestioned. Now, the year 23 BC, Augustus had assumed the title consul every year up to that point, but hand over to someone else. But because everyone knew that Augustus had all the power, was calling all the shots. So, choice of new titles are being granted. One being Augustus, the other was Princeps. Princeps was the one that Octavian preferred, means first among equals. Because all are equal, but some are more equal than others. But first among equals. That's one he preferred. But the Senate gave him the title Augustus, which means revered one. And actually, all future Roman emperors are going to be taking this title, Augustus. Except the Senate also called him a pater patria, which means father of the country. Basically calling him so important that basically he's the founder of the new Roman state. And of course, in such an arrangement, it is not unusual for such bodies to be granting overly inflated titles and give them overly inflated sense of their own actual achievements and personal worth. You have some countries where dictators have taken over, they've named entire months of the calendar after themselves. Guess they're a little bit bonkers. Well, the Romans, the average Roman's standard of living increased greatly because you don't have these disruptions in trade anymore. You don't have you have increasing order and stability, so trade and commerce is increasing. And plus the fact the Roman Navy is uncontested in the Mediterranean Sea by this point. With the Roman Navy, they are able to go from all points of the Mediterranean region. They're able to essentially destroy any piracy in the region, making a Mediterranean Sea entirely safe for Roman commerce. In fact, Rome so dominated the entire Mediterranean coast, all parts of it, that the Romans began calling the Mediterranean, but Mare Nostrum means our sea, ours. Essentially, Roman trading ports, Roman Navy, protected by the Roman Navy, Roman shipping, Roman money. Except, the Mediterranean was basically a Roman lake. And they ruled it for centuries. And most people are fairly satisfied with Augustus's rule. There were some couple of problems here and there, but you also have as a great exploration of art and literature in this time period. Among those others, the Roman historian Tacitus. Two great works, one called Agricola, which is a biography of his father, which is an important figure in the late Republic. Interesting one called Germanian, 1st century AD. Basically, it's a history of the Germanic tribes north of the Alps. The Romans simply referred to them as barbarians, but there were these are Germanic tribes, mostly nomadic.
They practiced a lot of cannibalism. Or they just starving.
And they're starving to do quite a bit. But we'll get to that later. Roman Empire.
Those tribes, like whole tribes, would eat each other and stuff like that. Germanic tribes.
Cannibalism was not nearly as widespread as what history sometimes, travelers sometimes made it out to be. Cannibalism is often used as a slur against somebody, trying to say these people have no morals and no respect. Cannibalism be practiced every so often, only in highly hierarchical societies. Where a couple of Germanic tribes might have practiced it once in a while, few, but very few. In fact, one slur the Romans made against Christians, try to keep people away from becoming Christian, which had become illegal about once it emerged, was saying Christians were cannibals, and because of Holy Communion, taking the bread says that is the flesh of Christ. Transubstantiation. I say, take the bread, take this as my flesh in remembrance of me. What Tacitus is trying to do is trying to dispel some rumors and myths about the Germanic tribes. But he's also doing it as a way of kind of contrasting them with Roman society, pointing out that Rome had solved some problems, but it still had some serious problems it needed to deal with and face up to. Among such other things was Tacitus' famous line from Germania was that good morals in Germany are better than good laws in Rome. Good morals are better than good laws. That is, the Germans were a relatively lawless society, relatively a chaotic society compared to Rome, but they had socially they had a sense of discipline and a sense of purpose and a sense of morality that Tacitus believed the Romans were really lacking in the 1st century AD. Except Germania became a popular work. We also have 2 other important poets of this time period. Probably the most important was Virgil. He's the author of the epic poem, the Aeneid. A very popular story. Essentially, it is a takeoff of Homeric epics. Essentially, Virgil wrote the story of what happened to some of the survivors of the fall of Troy. Now, according to Homer, there weren't any survivors. Who knows if there were actually here or not, but Virgil decides to play history a little bit. And says, no, what happened was the survivors of the fall of Troy went to Italy and they founded Rome. Of course, the Romans loved all things Greek. And so they loved the story that Rome was part of this great epic of Homer. That's a great clash between these Greek armies so many centuries before. Of course, it's all made up, but Romans started teaching it in their schools and history books. And yeah, it's true. It's about as true as the idea that 2 men were raised by wolves. But what's the thing like facts get in the way of a good story?
Like you mentioned, being raised by wolves, surely you have to know how to build a civilization.
Oh, yeah. But extremely popular story, still read widely today in college classrooms. Another one is a poet was Ovid. Wrote a lot of love poems, some of which were, well, so pornographic that even shocked some Roman audiences. And that was hard to do. But Ovid managed to do it. Augustus tried to have several of them banned, especially after Ovid had an affair with Augustus's daughter. And Augustus is trying to be Mr. Family Values here, trying to basically restore traditional Roman morals and virtues, particularly the idea of the sanctity of marriage, while his daughter is running off having an affair. Well, of course, he believed that his own family had to live up to these same laws, so he had her exiled for a while. Basically made her go live on an island in the Mediterranean for a few years till she came back and straightened up her act. Of course, Augustus was married 4 times himself. There's morality, but he's encouraging men to get married. He passed a tax on bachelors, tried to encourage them to get married. It's generally very popular. He expanded the empire somewhat. Should be here, map here, page. Here on page 156. In Mauritania, all but northwestern Africa was under Roman control in the Mediterranean, but basically all the rest. He even pushed into Germany for a while, 12 BC, taking the area from what is roughly the Rhine River to the Elbe, essentially the Low Countries of basically Holland, Luxembourg, and then what is now northwestern Germany, making it a province he called Germania. But unfortunately, in 9 AD, the Romans suffered their worst defeat up to that point, which was the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Germanic general ambushed 3 Roman legions, annihilating them to a man. All Roman troops wiped out in Germany. All of them. And so after that, the Romans never again tried to move in and conquer German territory. After that,
Do you know what that means?
Tudor force. I'm not exactly sure what it means. I think it's just a place name. But afterward, Augustus insisted on creating what Kim called a defensive empire. But the Roman Empire at that point, see here in the light green, he said was as large as the Roman Empire could manage. Try to push beyond that point was really pushing the limits that the Romans really didn't have the resources to govern an empire any larger than that. So warning successors not to go any further beyond that. Now, of the military, Augustus maintained an army of 28 legions, which is 150,000 men. A huge army for the time period, but here's the difference in what's happening in Rome. Rome can guard the entire empire at this point of 150,000 men, but by the 5th century, Rome has an army of 500,000 and they're losing. Roman legionaries are recruited only from citizens, under Augustus largely from Italy. He has an auxiliary forces of about 130,000 people from subject peoples. He also established the Praetorian Guard. Basically, his personal army, his personal bodyguards, 9,000. The auxiliary force is basically kind of reserve forces, but turning down 290,000 men, that's basically the limit for armed forces. That point's all they needed. Legions scattered at different strategic points throughout the Roman Empire.
Oh, legion was 2,000 then.
It depends on the time period. That's what he considered to be legions. And did pretty well for them for a while, for the first, second centuries. Well, late in his life, though, he wrote a book called Res Gestae, which is basically his autobiography, basically listing his achievements, his thoughts on his life as emperor. See excerpts over here on page 149. Talk about at the age of 19, of my own initiative, at my own expense, I raised an army by means which I liberated the republic, oppressed by the tyranny of a faction. It's about Mark Antony's supporters. To those who assassinated my father, Julius Caesar. Now, it says something there, again, trying to play really into his relationship with Julius Caesar, but biologically, Octavian is the son of Julius Caesar's niece, that is his sister's daughter's son. But Julius Caesar really liked Octavian, so fairly close, and he basically adopted him in his will, basically named him as his son. Now, in Roman society, adoptions were open affairs, basically. You're brought into the family at whatever age. And they said, you are part of the family. I talk about those who assassinated my father, I drove into exile, avenging their crime by a due process of law, and afterwards, when they waged war against the state, I conquered them twice on the battlefield. was different wars and so forth, contributions to the state. Talking about how well he compensated soldiers. At 26, I extended the frontiers, all the provinces of the Roman people, and whose boundaries are peoples not subject to our empire. 27, I added Egypt to the empire of the Roman people. Where he established colonies of soldiers. Basically, Roman colonies are typically established by veterans, basically planned for the troops. Well, centuries later, time later, about 2nd century BC, you have a Roman historian named Suetonius. He's the personal secretary to the Emperor Hadrian. He had access to a lot of these records. Some of these people were still alive and different points. Sort of a collection of historical biographies of these different men that can be called 12 Caesars. So some more curious details of their lives included, but became a very popular book. Read you a few excerpts here. Talks about Augustus Caesar. Talk about Julius Caesar first, and next. At the age of 4, Augustus lost his father. At the age of 12, delivered a funeral oration in honor of his grandmother Julia, Julius Caesar's sister. 16, now having come of age, he was awarded military decorations, and Caesar celebrated his African triumph. They'd been too young for overseas service. Caesar went to fight Pompey's sons in Spain. Augustus followed with a very small escort along roads held by the enemy after shipwreck too. Today, semi-convalescence from serious illness. This action delighted Caesar, who moreover soon formed a high estimate of Augustus' character, quite apart from the energetic manner in which he had made the journey. So basically, he's traveling from Rome to see his uncle, and is shipwrecked, and very cleverly manages to survive the whole thing. That's 54. Talks about how after his conquest of Egypt, he basically toured Egypt. Among other things, Caesarion, the son of Julius Caesar, with his affair with Cleopatra, who was quite a teenager at that point, Augustus had him killed. Make sure there be no challenges to his power. And then went to tour the tomb of Alexander the Great, who actually had been eventually buried and mummified in Egypt. Suetonius says there, about this time he had a sarcophagus containing Alexander the Great's mummy removed from its shrine, and after, along with its feature, he showed his veneration by crowning the head with a golden diadem and strewing flowers on the trunk, basically crowning it. When asked to visit the mausoleum of the Ptolemies, basically the successor kings to Alexander, who controlled Egypt. Augustus replied, I came to see a king, not a row of corpses. He suffered only 2 heavy and disgraceful defeats, both in Germany. Generals concerned being Lollius and Varus, 15 BC and 9 AD. Lollius' defeat was ignominious rather than of strategic importance, but Varus has nearly wrecked the empire. He had 2 to work forced. Since 3 legions, their general, and all our officers and auxiliary forces and the general staff were massacred to a man. When the news reached Rome, Augustus ordered patrols in the city at night for any rising. Probably might cause uprising or some kind of attempt on him. And prolonged the terms of the provincial governor, so the allies should have men of experience whom they trusted to confirm their allegiance. He also vowed to celebrate games in honor of Jupiter greatest and best, basically a series of festivals and Olympic Games. As soon as the political situation improved, similar vows had been made during the Cimbrian and Marcian wars. They said he took this after so deeply to heart that when he left his hair and beard untrimmed for months, often beat his head in the door, shouting, Quintilis Varus, give me back my legions. And always kept the day as an anniversary of deep mourning. So Augustus introduced many reforms in the army, besides reviving certain obsolete practices and exacting the strictest discipline. He grudged even his generals home leave to visit their wives and grandest only during winter. When a Roman knight cut off the thumbs of his two young sons to incapacitate them for army service, it get hard for them to hold a sword or a bow, Augustus had him and his property publicly auctioned. Realizing that a group of tax collectors were bidding for the man, knocked him down to imperial freedom, with instructions they should be sent away and allowed a free existence in some country place. He gave the entire 10th Legion ignominious discharge because of their insolent behavior. And some other legions also demanded discharge in a similarly riotous manner. He disbanded them, withholding the bounty which they would have earned had they continued loyal. If a cohort broke in battle, Augustus ordered the survivors to draw lots, then executed every 10th man, again, decimation. Also, let's call those obsolete practices. And fed the remainder on barley bread instead of the customary wheat ration. Centurions found absent from posts were sentenced to death, like other ranks, and any lesser dereliction of duty earned them one of several degrading punishments, such as being made stand all day long in front of general headquarters, sometimes wearing tunics without sword belt, sometimes carrying 10-foot poles or even sods of turf. Basically, stand there with a bunch of mud in your hand. So he's able to have a very disciplined army. But gets the point, AD 14, he's 76 years old. Extraordinarily grown life for Rome at that time period. The problem was, he outlived all his children and grandchildren. Outlived everybody.
He outlived the children and grandchildren?
Yeah. So they all he's in his 70s, late 70s by this point. So all he can do now is question who's going to be his successor. So he goes with one of his son-in-laws, Tiberius. Proved loyal up to that point, but so Octavian dies quietly in AD 14, and now Tiberius comes to the throne. Now, Tiberius, I should say, like Caligula and Nero, not exactly the poster child for mental health. His excesses managed to shock Roman audiences, and like I said, that was very hard to do. But Tiberius, synonymous with corruption. Tiberius routinely ignored his duties as emperor, in fact, spending most of the time on a private island in the Mediterranean, where he kept his slaves running around naked. He would routinely rape them, and was a well-known pedophile as well. Murdered his political opponents, stole from the treasury. Thief, murderer, rapist, pedophile. Pretty much largely disgusted by the Romans. The Roman audience was pretty much disgusted him. They're disgusted by him. In fact, notice the time period here, 14 to 37. What's happening in Judea at this time? Roman occupation, but life and ministry of Christ. And Christ says, talks about whose image is on this coin, that is the Caesar. The Caesar he's talking about, to render unto Caesar, he's talking about this man. You know what kind of man that was. It was widely known what kind of man Tiberius was. But since he's the emperor, nothing anybody can do anything about.
So his face is in the money, in the coin?
Yeah, you're the emperor, your face is on all the money. It's a silver and gold coins. And so, like I say, in American society, you're not put on the money. To be put on the money or a stamp, you have to be dead first. But the Romans, since their emperors were to be worshipped, particularly Tiberius, and he insisted on this. Like I said, he can do anything, put his image on anything he wants. Statues of himself in every Roman city, in every Roman square. Holidays named for himself. He can put his images on all the money. So he can do anything he wants. Absolute power. And no matter what he did, or how disgusting, or how any other Roman would be butchered as part of their execution, Tiberius can get away with it because he's the emperor. He names the laws. He's not subject to the laws. He tells you what the laws are. But Rome was at peace. The people were stable. The economy stable. This man is not. So it's considered something of a relief when Tiberius died, presumably poisoned, and this man comes to power, Caligula. His given name actually was Gaius, but commonly known as Caligula. But Caligula proves to be even worse than Tiberius. That's hard to do.
Yeah.
Like in some places, yes, it seems like they're actually trying to outdo each other, but I understand the mindset. You're raised in the royal family. They're all part of the Julio-Claudian line that is all part of that family Caesar. They raise all the wealth and all the power in Rome. Not only do they have all this power, all this influence, so who's to tell them no? They don't live with their responsibilities. What's going to happen to them?
Gonna be killed. Oh, I thought double bunch.
No. Like I said, they'll probably get killed just because they're the wrong person, the wrong place, the wrong time. But it's just kids growing up, not living with responsibility, or teenagers doing whatever they want, no consequences. They don't have to learn responsibility. They don't have to learn respect for others. Mercy is not a quality they need to bother with, especially as Roman, especially as part of the ruling family, Rome. Absolute power, corrupting absolutely. We'll dive into that more next time. Look at some of the more of the emperors of the first century, more what Suetonius has to say about them, and move into some more stable emperors, the 5 good emperors. So keep reading books, chapter 6, and if there's nothing more, we'll see you all next time.